Grazie. Il prossimo pezzo, che è un altro bellissimo brano di Luigi Bonafede, lo vorrei dedicare con il cuore a un carissimo amico che non vedevo da tanti anni e che sapevo ovviamente che era a Torino in questi giorni, ma me lo sono trovato davanti proprio mentre stavo pensando a lui, casualmente, pochi istanti fa. È un grandissimo scrittore inglese con cui ho avuto il piacere anni fa di fare un divertentissimo tour insieme a Furio e a Manu Roche, grande batterista francese che è qua nel pubblico. L'autore, questo scrittore ha scritto un magnifico libro, per me forse il più bel libro sul jazz che abbia mai letto. Il libro si chiamava Natura, morta, custodia di sax, e lui è Geoff Dyer. Geoff, this one for you.
Oh, I was really touched by that. He's a great player, isn't he? Really strong. He's like Coltrane, very Coltrane influence, isn't it?
Yeah.
About political engagement and jazz today. Do you think that nowadays jazz and political engagement are less related than in the past, and why, in your opinion?
Goodness, I mean, what a question. I thought we might have had a bit of foreplay first, of just getting to know each other a bit, but yeah, it's a huge question. Well, that is an incredibly interesting one. I think this whole issue of the relationship between jazz and what's going on in the world at large is so interesting, because obviously it's it's mainly an abstract form. It's often there's no words in it. So to a great extent, musicians in the 50s and 60s, they're responding mainly to other musicians, to what's gone before, to recent developments. They're in that universe of music. It's a sort of self-enclosed universe in a way. At the same time, of course, I mean, it happens that what for me is the peak period of jazz, which is from the late 1950s through the 1960s, that's coinciding with, some of the most important historical political events for African Americans. And it's really interesting with, when you see the way, is the music, or is it the changes in the music, are they or are they not related to the move, let's say, from civil rights to black power, black nationalism, all that kind of thing. And it's really interesting, a piece of music, let's say by, let's say that Coltrane track, Alabama, is it or is it not a direct response to the bombing of that church in Alabama and with those three girls dying? I mean, it's funny, I'm doing that thing now, I'm responding to your question with further questions, because I think it's so difficult to say. And then, last night at the Jazz Festival, the Mingus Dynasty band, they were playing Fables and Forbes, which is very directly, one of the rare examples of a very specific, explicit political.
Also, Free Cell Blockade, for example.
Right. Yeah. There's some of that, and then I think there's another way to address the question as well. There was a time when the way people learned to play jazz, it was sort of on the road or hanging out with other jazz musicians. At a time when it was, very, very highly regarded by a certain number of people, but it hadn't been properly institutionalized. Now, of course, the way you learn jazz, you would probably need to go to some sort of university to study music. So that's had an effect as well. But then, jazz has attained much greater respectability. You could say, in a way, though, that it's perhaps lost something of its inherently, not exactly rebellious, but sort of resistance, quality of resistance and opposition. But then, you could say again that's in keeping with the fact that we have Obama in the White House now. So these things. These are huge questions, which I've managed to avoid answering.
Okay. When you improvise, when you write, Do you try to recreate with written words the styles of the musician you are writing about that appearing in your book?
Sure, yeah. So as you so correctly say, of course the piece on Mingus is in a very different style to say the piece on Lester Young, because their styles are so different. At the same time, though, one of the most important things in jazz is to have your own sound. And although my Mingus section is Mingusy and the Lester Young bit is Lester Youngy, both of them are sort of Dyer-esque as well. So they're both very obviously my versions rather than somebody else's. At that stage, I was a lot younger, and I think in a way, maybe if I was to write this book now, which by the way I would be completely incapable of doing, if I was to write it now, it would be more like me, because just as I've got older, my limbs have become less supple. As I've got older, so my own sense of my own style has perhaps kind of hardened. I mean, it's sort of I've got a greater sort of backlog of my own works that have influenced me. So I think I was, in a way, much more receptive and could be much more immediately responsive to those styles of other musicians. One thing I noticed very clearly, I mean, there was a kind of lyricism going on in that book, which now in my writing it's only there very, very occasionally. But that's pretty typical, really. Of course, your writing is going to be more lyrical when you're in your early 30s than when you're in the mid 50s.
Okay.
Sad but true.
I would like to ask you, what are your favorite jazz autobiographies, and what role did they play in your writing? And also, apart from jazz literature, who are your favorite literary authors?
Oh yeah, well, to go back to the first part of the question, I think there were 3 autobiographies that I was very conscious of. Mingus's, what's it called, Beneath the Underdog, yeah, which I quite liked, and it was quite funny. Then I very much liked Hampton Hawes's book, Raise Up Off Me. But like you, I think the best of the autobiographies is The Art Pepper, because of its honesty, which is completely compatible with megalomania and myth-making. For example, that brilliant epilogue, where he talks about when he's playing this gig with Sonny Stitt.
Yeah.
In a way, it can't be literally true, and he says Sonny Stitt sits in on his gig and plays for, half an hour or something, and then anyway, it's great, but it conveys a kind of essential psychological truth about Art Pepper. And I also love the way that there's so little in the book about music. It's all just about sort of, women and drugs and jail, all this sort of stuff. Yeah, it's great, and it's wonderful. And that was very, very helpful to me. And then in terms of going back now, I mean, back then, there weren't too many really great books about jazz, but 2 that were really good. I mean, I think since my book came out, a whole load of other interesting books have appeared. But I really was very inspired by Michael Ondaatje's book, Coming Through Slaughter, about Buddy Bolden, which I drew on a lot because of the freedoms he took and because of the intensity of the writing. And also a book which I know some people aren't so keen on because they feel it's unreliable. That would be Ross Russell's biography of Charlie Parker called Bird Lives. And I thought the thing about that, I thought he captured the moment, the historical moment, very, very well. And Charlie Parker's personality came across very, very clearly. But in a way, what I want to do is slightly alter the terms of your question, because I always was much more interested, not so much in books about musicians as other musical tributes. So recently, I'm going to struggle to, no, I've remembered his name. I mean, a really great piece of music called on the album, I think it's called Homage to Charles Parker, by the trombonist George Lewis, who's one of these people who was a musician, totally involved in that Chicago AACM organisation, which he's written a history of. He sort of converted to being an academic, and then wrote this great, did this great record. He plays trombone, and it's in 2 parts. I can't remember the first part. The second track is called Charles Parker, and it's this beautiful, very slow, haunting homage to Charles Parker, and it was the musical tributes to other musicians that were more directly helpful to me than books in a way. And I've become, even since then, I've become very, very interested in this thing of the way that, you know, people pay some sort of homage and tribute to people who've gone before. But I became first of all conscious of it in the world of jazz.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.